So, David.
Oh, so Michelle.
Hi.
Hello.
We're a year on from the
Happy
Ukraine.
anniversary.
I know.
Well, a little late. Sorry. It's a belated anniversary celebration.
I know.
Celebration's probably not the right word.
We're not celebrating anything.
We're not celebrating. We're doing a retrospective.
A retrospective.
A year gone by. We're having a look at the last year and that plucky little country
I know. Just won't give up.
in Eastern Europe. Throw down, Ukraine. Throw down, I say.
Okay, look, let's not get so flippant about
But
it. It is still
I'm
a
not being
war.
flippant. I'm really excited because we've got a guest.
I'm excited we got a guest because it means
Exactly.
I don't have to just talk to you.
Oh, you make me
So-
feel like I'm married to you.
Well, we are. We're studio wedding.
Exactly.
Let's bring him in.
Let's do it.
You're listening to I Spy, the unwanted anniversary of Australian intelligence.
Yeah, I got your present.
What is it?
It's an empty shell casing. because
Okay.
I'm sorry, your gun doesn't work anymore.
That's a really shit
I
gift.
know, it's a really shit anniversary, honey.
Hello and welcome to I Spy. My name's Michelle Stevenson. I'm here with David Callan and we've got a guest. We've had him here before
We have.
and he's been doing the rounds, I have to say. Quite busy.
Very popular guy.
Very popular guy.
Very popular guy.
Do you want to do the introduction?
You do the intro. You're the professional.
No, you do it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, round of applause, Misha Zelinsky. Misha, how are you? Good to have you in.
I'm well, mate. Good to be with you. I'm not sure I'd say popular, but busy, perhaps.
Well,
is
yeah,
what it-
every time I look on the TV, you're there.
Yeah.
You're there talking
Well, look,
about
plenty
stuff.
of unpopular people on television all the time.
That's
so
a good
I
point.
don't
He's
know.
a tick.
Yes. So, Misha, you just to fill people in because I don't know if they remember last time we had you on. Now, you have a very good podcast called Diplomates.
Mm-hmm.
You also write for the Fin Review and you've spent some time in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So I think you kind of tick, tick, tick. You tick all the boxes.
Yep.
Now, Ukraine, year on, they were doing really well early on, and now it feels like it's at a stalemate. Russia has sent in more troops, and it seems to be that this war is not ending anytime soon.
Well, it's hard to know, right? So we are 1 year into Vladimir Putin's 24-hour war, right?
Yeah.
So that's
I know.
an important
3 days
marker.
max.
That's right. So that's, I guess, a measure in many ways of how badly this has gone for Vladimir Putin and Russia. You know, it's a complete disaster. So in terms of where the war's at, you're right in many ways that through winter, there hasn't been a lot of movement in the front line. There's been a lot of
Yeah.
activity.
Yeah.
So it's not to say because the lines haven't moved enormously like they did through the Ukrainian counteroffensive throughout the autumn, the northern autumn. They certainly have been fighting very intensively in very small area, particularly around a city called Bakhmut. People might have heard about. Yeah, the Russians are losing somewhere between 800 to 1,000 soldiers a day there.
think
So that's the meat grinder, the likes of which we really haven't seen since World War II.
Well, I think the
Yeah.
figures are something like 200,000 dead and
Right.
injured. It's like
Yeah,
this
that's
is getting up into sort of World War I territory,
Right.
Somme kind of battle type
Right.
stuff.
I mean, the Soviet armies, I think, lost less than 20,000 in 10 years in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
The United States lost about 4,500 troops across 2 wars over about 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So this level of attrition is extraordinary. And even for Russia's sort of legendary ability to withstand huge losses of military, it's got a stomach for it. Those have typically occurred during wars of defense, not offense. Now,
Yeah.
Putin's trying to characterize it as a defensive war against Ukraine, the West. Everyone's trying to get them in sort of his batty speech last week that went for about 2 hours. So one of the things dictators can do is, apart from press everyone, they can also force people to listen to them for 2 hours because no one else would get away with that length of speech in
No.
any kind of polite company.
I've tried it with Michelle and it just doesn't work.
I literally get up and leave.
Right, exactly, because you can.
Yeah,
Had
yeah.
he been a dictator, you would stand and never be the last one to stop clapping in a dictatorship, they say.
Exactly.
Or the first one, rather. So, so the war is, in a weird position in the sense that it's not moving around a lot, but I actually think that it's actually very well placed for a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Now, it seems counterintuitive because what we know is the Ukrainians are waiting on a whole heap of kits on its way,
Yeah.
tanks in particular.
Yep.
And that's going to be a big game change for them on the ground. Now, last time we saw Ukraine in a similar position where they were withstanding a huge withering assault on their armies was middle part of last year.
Yeah.
After they lost the Battle of Kiev, the Russians then said, we're going to focus on Donbass in the east, which is where Bakhmut is, but similar area. There was a city called Severodonetsk, which was this type of fighting. The Russians were grinding forward and everyone said, look, there's no point resisting them. You can't resist this Russian
Yeah.
army. They love taking losses. They almost, they get off on it almost in some ways, a perversity around that, and that the Ukrainians are being silly defending this.
Now, didn't they wind up? It was the steelworks. They wound up
Well,
basically.
that was Mariupol.
Oh, Mariupol.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But likewise, right? So,
Yeah.
but what ended up happening in that eastern offensive of the Russians, that midpoint of the war, which is a grinding type of war, everyone's like, it's not moving around. What's happening? The Ukrainians are gradually being pushed back. It ended up being a bit of a rope-a-dope strategy for those that know their boxing history.
Oh,
So
yeah.
essentially, the Russians punched themselves out in that period, and then that opened them up to this huge counteroffensive we saw in the northeast around Kharkiv, and of course culminating in taking back Kherson. I think a little bit similar things happening right now. The Russians are exhausting themselves,
Yep.
trying to take not kilometers. This is measured in houses.
Yeah.
They
It's
lose
door to
800
door.
or 1,000 people to gain a house.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of firefighting, is
Right,
that correct?
right.
As opposed to a lot less bombing and stuff like
It's-
that. It seems like there's been a
Well,
lot more
it's more-
firefighting and
Yeah.
combat in that way as
It's
well.
World War II style fighting,
That's
which
what
is
I meant,
essentially
yeah.
soldiers holding rifles
Yes.
and artillery bombardment, which is not a sophisticated method of fighting. This is a World War II
Yes.
tactic.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, and it's come from the very beginning, one of the things that came out with the initial special military operation, as they put it, was the fact that the Russians never told their troops while they were sitting in Belarus and on the Russian border that they were going into Ukraine. They just said it's an exercise. So
Yeah,
a lot
training
of
exercise.
a training exercise.
They
Now,
pack their parade outfits with them.
Oh yeah, the generals were told to take their
Right.
uniforms because it'll
Yeah,
be
we'll
over.
be marching through Kiev.
Yeah, you'd be,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
the big thing is the troops themselves. A lot of them were coming from the eastern provinces of Russia, which is poor. So they went, we're on an exercise. We don't need this GPS system. Let's take it down to the marketplace and sell it. Do we really need all this fuel? Let's sell it. So the thing was, when they attacked Kiev, the Ukrainians were very smart because they went, let's not worry about the tanks. Let's worry about the support vehicles. Go for the fuel, go for the maintenance. And as soon as they did that, the Russians' logistics just fell apart. And the other problem was they were all unblooded, excuse the phrase, but they were inexperienced soldiers. They weren't veterans. So they basically blazed away with all their ammo in the first 4 days.
Yeah, and I was listening to a Ukrainian soldier who was kind of recounting like the firefight on the front lines. And he was saying it felt like you're in a video game. He was actually in a firefight for over 2 hours, which is just a long
mad.
time. And he said what was unusual was there were Russians just standing there, not ducking for cover, just shooting and standing. And it's like they had no idea. Like they just didn't know where they were or what they were doing.
Yeah,
And-
cool. I've got to respawn. I'll be fine.
Yeah,
It's like,
well,
it doesn't work like that.
well,
Right.
because Putin is putting in a lot of these young, inexperienced
Yeah.
boys into the fight, and I can't see how it's going to last.
Well, it's very difficult. He was very reluctant to do the call up in September, October last year.
course,
The
'cause
reason he
it's
did that is because
unpopular.
basically they had 200,000 troops situated on the border before the war in February of 2022.
Yep.
They, for lack of a better term, burned through those, depending on whatever figure you want to cite. Let's say it's 150 to 200,000 dead or injured significantly that they can't fight. So you've got to call up more.
Yep.
But even, having called up, they say 300,000 is probably more like 250,000. Not all of them are equipped. You can do the math pretty quickly, saying if you're losing 6,000 or 7,000 troops a week, you don't really have the capacity to do that. So Putin's stuck in the sense that the war is increasingly unpopular. It seemed to be going very badly. The last time they did a call up, not only did the people avoid it, but they left the country. So about 700,000 Russian,
Have gone.
principally men, fled to the country. A lot of them are actually the more highly skilled. So it's actually economically damaging as much as it is, demographically damaging. And so he knows he doesn't want to do that again because it's an admission that things are going badly. At the same time, they can't really change their tactics.
Yeah. So, what is the end game here for Putin? Like,
there
if
isn't
you were
one.
to, I know, but like, if you were to strategically look at it,
Yep.
what is his way out here?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that. So I wrote a lengthy essay, a 4,000-word essay last Friday just on this, but saving everyone. I know you're listening on a podcast thinking 4,000 words, I'm not reading
Look,
that.
I
I did.
tried.
I read it.
Oh, you well, there you go.
I
Full
know you
marks.
read.
Tick.
I read it.
I
Tick.
started it.
Well, here's the test. No. So basically, look, to win a war, you need three things. You need a willing and healthy population prepared to fight, for the reason we just went through. You need cash, a cash-generated economy, which Putin no longer has. The oil caps are actually destroying the Russian budget. So they've got a $25 billion US budget deficit a month.
Wow.
And they've got a sovereign wealth fund, maybe 150 billion, maybe, and they're drawing down that. So again, 6 months runway, probably, maybe less. And then lastly, you need the ability to make weapons. Again, they can't.
Yep.
And that's because of the semiconductor sanctions against them. So basically, they can't make the things that they're destroying. So they've lost half their tanks in this first era of the war, and they're replacing them not with modern tanks, but with like Soviet era tanks they're dusting off out of the warehouse. And they're wheeling out these old tanks. So, I mean, they are completely essentially lost their ability to fight war.
Now, interestingly enough, when you talk about the ammunition, one of the problems that the Ukrainians are going to have as well is the fact that America has now had to treble its production of artillery shells. Right? The UK discovered when they started going, let's go through our inventory and see what we can hand out. They realised that if the UK went to war today, they would be out of ammo in 6 days.
I mean, this is a global issue that everyone was running their military inventories like just-in-time supply chains. Basically running a military like you run a convenience store.
Yeah.
And probably not the way to do it. Milk deliveries and artillery shells are slightly different in their importance.
As someone said, it's the first time you've had an industrialised war in Europe since World War II.
Well, that's right. And we obviously had Iraq and Afghanistan, but they were nothing like that. No. And they were counterinsurgency wars, so you could arm your army as you went. But anyways, in terms of Putin's endgame, the problem for him is that he's dialed this thing up to existential levels.
Yeah.
And so he says, if we don't win this, Russia, not just the entire Russian state will be destroyed by the West.
Yep.
So once you've dialed it up to that level, you must win. So he politically must win, but for the reason I just sort of spelled out, he sort of practically can't win.
Yep.
So his ability to influence things on the ground is diminishing by the day, and yet he needs the political victory more and more and more. So at some stage, and I've written this, and I'm a little bit forward-leaning on this, but I think at some stage Russian elites are going to say, you know what, there's no way out of this for Putin, but there might be a way out of this for us.
Yes.
And once they realise that, he might find himself falling out of a window like a Russian oligarch.
That's kind of where my head's at. Right. What is the probability of that? I mean,
hard.
At the end, because at the end of the day, you've got a lot of people in Russia are really keen to hold on to that wealth.
Daddy, I want a pony.
Yeah.
Veruca Salt is alive and well and living in Russia, and she wants her boat back.
Well, that's right. And so a lot of people have had their elite lives taken away from them. The ordinary Russian people are very poor because these Russian elites have stolen all this wealth.
100%.
Right? But those that are in and around Putin, the deal was, look, we steal, you run the place, and that's the agreement. Now, he's kind of blown up their ability to have their European playgrounds and enjoy their yachts, etc. But it's really the Russian spies that run the country, and increasingly they're looking at this going, this is going very badly, and there's really no way out. Putin can't negotiate for political reasons, as we've said. The West really can't legitimately negotiate with him, given he's a war criminal. It'd be a little bit like saying, let's negotiate with Hitler.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do it. Like, I mean, it was possible to reconstruct Germany because Hitler was no longer there. And so those things are gradually, creating this pressure on him. But to your question about how do you kill him, he's a hard guy to kill.
I would imagine he would be.
I got this sort of theory in politics or in life generally that the thing you worry about most is what you're most guilty of. Donald Trump thinks everyone's corrupt. Why?
Because he's corrupt.
Right.
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin thinks everyone's trying to kill him. Why?
Because he's always killing everyone.
If he was Vladimir Putin, he'd be trying to, not Vladimir Putin, he'd be trying to kill Vladimir Putin, right?
Yeah.
And so he's extraordinarily isolated. So everyone's saying, he no longer flies. He travels only by armoured train. He basically is in a compound. These long tables, everyone says, he's sick. Look, he might be. The intelligence is mixed on that. But it's actually, he's terrified of anyone coming near him because of poisons.
Yeah.
So he's killed so many people through touch poisons. He's got a food taster.
He's got a food taster.
So the guy's nuts.
Just on the illness, a lot of people thought he had palsy because his right arm was always, he might have had a stroke.
Right.
Because his right
always
arm
holding onto the table.
But his right arm was always down by his hip.
Right.
It never moved. Now, the interesting thing about that was, as they discovered, it wasn't palsy. As a KGB officer, he was trained to keep his hand close to his right hip because that's where your gun is.
Right.
So, interesting enough,
he's the KGB man forever.
Once in, never out. Trust me, I know.
Right.
But that's why I walk with my hands in the air, because I'm an ASIO officer and I don't have a gun. So please don't shoot me.
And you're a glorified letter opener. Let's be real.
Yeah, let's be honest, man.
You pushed a lot of paper around.
Mate, I could kill you with a mail trolley in a second.
Yes.
Right, but the thing is with Putin's endgame, I mean, one of the things with the rhetoric he has been using is if he does get dragged to a peace table, he has the option to turn around to Russia and see, I saved you from NATO. I saved you from the West. I managed to keep Ukraine at bay. I mean, the whole fact that he said we were attacked by the Ukraine.
It's a lot of nonsense.
Dude, no one believes
I just don't see now, given how he's dialed it up so badly, that anything... The problem is peace simply has to involve Russian armies leaving Ukraine. He can't countenance that for the reasons that we've gone through. So at some point, the only person that can negotiate is someone else, right? Now, that doesn't have to necessarily be a, inverted commas, good person or someone that we like, but someone that we can deal with that can repudiate Putin, can put in some process around repudiation of war crimes.
Yep.
And that way, the West in good faith can say, okay, you've removed your armies. There's going to be an account for war crimes. You can ratchet down sanctions and you can find a way to de-escalate it. But with him there, I just can't see how either side can negotiate. He can't, nor can we really. And the terms that they put forward is essentially, we'll negotiate on the basis that Ukraine surrenders and gives us everything that we want. I mean, what nonsense. Or they get essentially some kind of stalemate where Russia, as we said, he's really struggling, gets a breather and comes back for more. I mean, that's something you've got to be concerned about too.
Well, the other question is China.
I was going to say that as well.
Very
kind of in and kind of out.
Tacitly supportive
Yes.
of Putin, or at least Russia, and they haven't done any arms, but they've certainly said, we want to build a relationship with you. But the interesting point that you might have made it in your essay, I'm not sure, because I have read
It's
a
really
lot.
long, it's hard to remember.
Yeah, but it's also, I've read so much of this over the last week, is the idea that China used to be a vassal state essentially to Russia. It's not anymore.
No, correct. Yeah.
Right, and the problem is the Russian people aren't going to take the fact that suddenly they're answerable to Xi Jinping.
Especially in the spy network, the Siloviki, as they call them, they hate the Chinese Communist Party. As you say, they were seen to be the junior partner, the joke partner.
Right.
And the idea that Vladimir Putin, as he's seeking a life raft away from Western sanctions, he's blown up his gas markets into Europe, basically the biggest earner for Russia, increasingly not just becoming a partner of China, becoming not a junior partner even, a client state of China, and that is unacceptable for the Chinese. But then also...
the Russians.
So the Russians, rather. But when you look at the Chinese as well, I mean...
The Chinese are loving this.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they are in a way, but at the same time, Vladimir Putin sold them a bit of a pup. So when they signed this so-called no limits partnership in February, right before the invasion, he was promised it would all. I believe Xi Jinping. We don't know. History will tell us, but I think Putin said, "Listen, this will all be over in 24 hours. We'll be looking at the goods, and then Taiwan will be next, perhaps." Of course, it all went to custard, and now Xi Jinping's holding hands with this regime that have committed all these war crimes is going very, very badly. So I think she's sitting there going, you know what, instinctively, I want to bail Putin out because he can see the guy's coming under pressure, and a new regime is far more unpredictable, even if it's not democratic.
Yeah.
They
Sometimes
might
it's
seek
better the
peace.
devil,
They might not want
Yeah.
to continue on this kind of bromance of dictators. So he's thinking about that. At the same time, though, and this is where I think in the end the calculus will land for the Chinese, they can't afford to get in a situation where they send weapons to Russia and there are sanctions against the Chinese economy. The Chinese economy is struggling.
Yep.
They need a rapprochement with the world in terms of trade. And the last thing China needs and the last thing Xi Jinping needs after zero COVID is an economic downturn. And so his geopolitical instincts, he tends to put politics and geopolitics before the economy.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, the deal for the Chinese with the Chinese government, such as it is, or the Chinese Communist Party with its people, is economic growth in exchange for personal liberty deprivation. If there's no economic growth, that deal becomes less palatable. So I think, he's going to want to do it, but I'm skeptical that they will do it. They're foxing because I think they enjoy having the world hopping around a bit.
Yeah.
And they're irritated after what happened with the spy balloons, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I personally take the view that it's gone so badly that the temptation of bail Putin will be there, but Putin out is there. But I think ultimately he's going overboard. And so to handcuff yourself to a washing machine as it goes off the ship, I think is a bad move.
Exactly. I think I think China would be looking at the end game for China. Honestly, I think is, can we deal with the next person coming in?
Right.
And that's the big issue: is who is the next person coming in?
Good question.
And without the Siloviki behind you, Russia is a really, really difficult nut to take over.
Totally.
So who is the person that's currently sitting in the box seat for them?
We don't really know. I speculated a bit in my piece. I mean, there is all the other options as well. One of the things people don't know about Russia is that, okay, you got the army, but they're actually all private armies as well. Essentially, armies that are loyal to warlords or to oligarchs.
I think you described it as being very much like Rome.
Absolutely like ancient Rome.
Your allegiance is to your general, not to the state.
Right. And so as a result, Putin's watching some of these guys very closely. Kadyrov, who's the essentially the president of the Chechen Republic, but a Putin thug. There's Wagner Group, Prigozhin, who it's Russia's private army that does all kind of black ops around the world, and there's some others as well. But inside the Siloviki, the head of the FSB, probably someone that we don't want. The head of the National Security Council, someone that we don't want. I mean, they're just as bad as Putin. The Foreign Service head, whose name escapes me, you might remember it.
No.
Anyway, I'm failing my own test here. I wrote about this, but
it's not a memory test.
No. But he is, I guess, the less odious one. He had a meeting with Bill Burns, the CIA director, in Turkey a couple of weeks back, and so it shows he's got still connections outside of Putin's court.
And I think that's the real key: is you've got to have somebody that can talk to the rest of the world.
Right. Someone that can say, "Listen, we want to de-escalate as much as you do," but the Siloviki might put up a prop. They might say, "Hey, we're going to put up a technocrat." So maybe like the Moscow mayor or something like that is someone who's like seen to be competent. We want to get back to economics and kind of dealing with the world and not kind of like, maybe we can look. Unfortunately, I'd love to see a democratic Russia, but I struggle to see it happening. No. But we could wind this back to Putin 2003, not Putin 2023.
Yeah, and the other thing that's quite interesting about that is, I mean, with the Siloviki and the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service being a potential candidate for replacement, the interesting thing about that is they are so active at the moment. I mean, we had Burjo last week come out and talk about how they just cracked a Russian spy ring.
A hive.
A hive.
So we'd ratchet it up from a nest to a hive.
We're now in hive territory.
I know what comes after the hive. What comes after the hive?
Herd. A mob.
Easier to spot.
Anyway, they're just grazing on intelligence there in the corner. Right. Now, the thing is, if you have a proactive intelligence service chief who is talking to the Western world, that is a more appealing, to me, that's a more appealing candidate than having, say, a warlord or a hawk.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, we don't need another hawk in there because Putin's done that enough.
That's right. And they're all conspiracy theorists, which is something that's not well understood. And they've been feeding Putin a lot of conspiracy theories.
Well, I mean, his speech was we're protecting the world from homosexuality and, or is it the decadence of the West?
Right. But his speech was also, it had like all those throwbacks from like a lot of the Twitter bots, from a lot of the stuff that they were saying, like the pedophiles and like all of that kind of stuff.
There's this weirdest feedback loop that exists between the Russian misinformation state, right-wing authoritarian parties inside democracies, right-wing news media, and it's just like feeding itself like on a loop. And so Putin is definitely trying to position himself. And you look at this weird relationship between him and Tucker Carlson, right? This sort of
that's an Ouroboros of monumental.
Right, but what it is he's trying to position Russia as the nation state that's standing up for conservative Christian values. In brackets white.
Doesn't he have a pole dancing studio in his mansion? Sevastopol.
I mean, Tucker Carlson is an actor. Let's be real. He's not really a journalist. He's someone who, I mean, he used to be on CNN. He's someone who
he's found a wave that he's ride,
he's literally found that wave that will make him a shit ton of cash and also give him power. And I mean, you look at the Fox, like Dominions are now, the voting machines. They're now having this fallout against Fox and the lawsuit, and Fox is saying, well, we're not a news site, we're entertainment. So I think a lot of people don't really put it in the box that it's meant to be in. So Tucker Carlson, of course, he's playing this like that.
No, but it is a weird.
But it's a weird relationship.
Like
conservative Americans,
who are hawkish against the CCP, right, and are hawkish against China. But I think, somehow dovish to Russia, it is a bizarre.
But I also think that has a lot to do with the fact that they're just racist.
Oh, that's why I said brackets white.
And I also think you'll find that it's there because, Joe Biden's president.
Right.
You have a Democratic president, therefore, whatever that president does, whether we support it or not, we don't support it. Right? Yeah. We are going to come out against it simply because it's him.
Yeah, you can imagine what they would have said if, had it been a Republican president who went to Kyiv. I mean, that was a real baller move by Biden.
Yes,
like,
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. Like, how would that have played in Ukraine, and how would that have been received in terms of like just boosting morale?
Monumental.
Man, he walked in with a pair of Ray-Bans and went, What's going on?
Yeah, looking resplendent, yellow and blue tie.
Well, but they have
done 20 hours of travel.
But they had, they had Boris Johnson. They've had
Right.
a lot of leaders
Yeah,
go.
but the US
Almost
president.
But the US president. I mean, they've had a lot of leaders go. But
But exactly, and it's the first time an American president has entered a war zone
Right.
where
With
there
no
were
boots on
not
the ground.
boots on the ground.
Right, and so it was a hugely gutsy
Massive,
move by
yeah.
Biden to do it. But I think in many ways, like there's a photo of Biden drinking at one of my favorite coffee shops, and that was kind of to me the great sort of contrast in that 1 year on, Biden's drinking coffee in Kyiv that Putin said he was going to knock over in 24 hours. Meanwhile, Putin's in a bunker somewhere ranting and raving about God knows what. And so I think it was a huge boost, and it says. It was a message to Ukrainians, and I think it's also a message to Europeans that the US is in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
And so stop dilly-dallying in terms of your preparedness to send weaponry that's required and give them what they need, because the sooner it gets dealt with, the better. And so the increased pain that can be inflicted on Putin on the battlefield and Putin in the economic space, something will snap for him.
Yeah.
I don't know what, and I can't predict how, but I'm confident it will happen.
But that was again something that I can't remember again where I read it. Someone was saying that the problem with getting him to the peace table or getting Russia to the peace table, not necessarily Putin, is both sides have to suffer. Right.
Yeah.
Now, Ukraine has suffered. It has suffered monumentally. It's lost territory. It's lost its sons. It's had its capital. Its capital is still being hit by missiles. Right. They are suffering. Right. Has Russia. At the moment, they're beginning to suffer economically. But when, it's that classic thing. When the body bags start coming home, that's when the population start going,
Well, you
why are we
can't
doing
lie
this?
about that.
No.
You can't cover up dead people.
Well, the Americans kind of did it with Iraq by just not talking about it.
But nevertheless, people know the truth in their communities,
Well,
right?
exactly.
If
You know
someone
when
doesn't come
someone's-
home, you can't cover that up. And 200,000 dead troops, if it's that's a lot of grieving families that say, what is this all about? And then they hear it's all going badly. And, people are talking. Like, you look at, it's hard to measure polling inside the US, but I saw polling by the Navalny team that said that, there'd been a big drop in terms of the confidence about how the war was progressing and how Putin was articulating that strategy. Now, unfortunately, that's not all people that say, let's end the war. There are people that say the reason why Putin has stuffed this because he hasn't gone hard enough.
Yep.
That will bump up against reality in the sense that for all the reasons I said, their war-making machine is basically kaput. But, that's where nuclear weapons and these types of threats come in.
Well, it's kind of like they're playing this old mentality of how Russia used to be in this new space where, we've spoken about this before. They're fighting against, social media. They're fighting against, the world is ready to kind of jump in and help. We're not putting boots on the ground, but we're going to sit back and, try and alleviate some of the pressure that's on Ukraine. No. But I think the scary thing, although I don't think it's going to happen, but the whole, he's making the threats, he's ramping up the rhetoric around nuclear. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I mean, whenever someone says nuclear, you shouldn't just dismiss it out of hand, right? I mean,
no.
But I always see when Putin discusses nuclear threats as a projection of weakness.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is,
I agree.
Yeah.
If the war's going well,
would he have
ever discussed nuclear weapons, right?
No.
It's what it comes down to is he's turned the country into a petrol station with a nuclear arsenal, right?
Yeah.
And he's saying, doesn't matter how humiliated our armies are. It doesn't matter how humiliated Russia's prestige is. Doesn't matter how isolated we are, how many sanctions there are. You must respect Russia because we can blow up the world, right?
Yeah.
That's essentially what he's whittled it down to. But as scary as it may be, the prospect of it, right? And I don't diminish it. I firstly think it wouldn't happen. I think even if he pressed the button, I suspect everyone around him goes, you know what, this ends in here.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
that button
That's
has been
probable.
unplugged.
I don't know, but I think that's probable.
The button is no longer connected.
Right. I think that would be a bit of a
Yeah.
internal red line. We don't know, but that's me speculating. But also, what he's hoping for is, look, Putin is no strategist. He's a gambler.
Yeah.
And so he's got himself into a mess here. And so he's trying to double down by ratcheting up the stakes and going, I'm all in. Are you prepared to go all in?
Yep.
And in the past, the West has always folded. You touched on a few when he invaded Georgia in 2008, the annexation of Crimea, the murdering of extraterritorial murders in other countries, the UK and other places, the meddling in the 2016 election. It goes on and on and on. And he always says, you know what? I don't care. I'm all in. And everyone goes, geez, he might turn off the gas. He might do these things. We better not do anything.
But now he's been doing those things and everyone's
well, that's right.
pushing back.
Well, the threat of something is always scarier than actually doing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I looked at this quite closely. Even if you launch a tactical nuclear weapon, inside Ukraine, as horrific as that would be, it would not fundamentally change the on-battlefield scenario.
Right.
No.
Doesn't actually change the war. So he would be doing it and probably have all kinds of hell rain down on him, even if he could do it.
I think if he did set off a tactical nuke, the problem he would have is the rest of the world, including China, would turn around and go, all right, son. Now you've gone to...
That's right. And so he gets more out of the threat than he gets out of the actuality, much like he would have got a lot more had he have just threatened to invade Ukraine.
Yeah.
I think he could have extracted quite a good settlement. And in fact, you look at the Minsk II Accords or Minsk I Accords, they look like a deal he'd beg to take right now, which is he gets to keep Crimea and that the so-called Donbass republics in Luhansk and Donetsk are semi-autonomous. That's not on the table now. And even if he could get that, he's blown up his economy, blown up his army, blown up his reputation. So that's my point about how he's snookered himself.
Yeah.
So the threat of something is scarier than actually doing it a lot of the time. Not to say that the threat of nuclear annihilation is not scary, but I always put in that bucket. It's a desperate move by a desperate man hoping to dig his way out, and we are right to, whilst be concerned about it, we have to ignore it, because the alternative is, okay, Putin, sorry, don't launch nukes, okay, peace. What have we taught him?
Yep.
And what have we taught other dictators with nuclear weapons?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And so, it's these are bad choices. Like, people say, oh, you want to see this war go on? Of course not. But it's a bad choice. We only have bad choices, which is we must win, and Ukraine must win. The worst choices are giving in and all these other worst things that would happen.
Yeah, if you give in, you've really sold the farm.
Totally.
You've given it away.
Totally.
Now, here's the thing. How much longer do you think this can last?
Well, I mean, I'm a little bit out there on this.
Yeah.
I think there'll be some big things happening next 3 to 6 months. I just think their cash machine, their ability to wage war on the battlefield, I think that a really big rout of the Russian army could set off all kinds of unpredictable consequences for Russia inside Moscow.
Ooh, yeah.
So if you saw a big rout like we saw in September where the Ukrainians were just pushing them back, tens and hundreds of kilometers and on the march, and the Russians are just in not a retreat, a disorderly retreat, complete
a rout.
rout. Another one of those, I don't think he can sustain another one of those.
No.
And the Russian morale is so low on the battlefield. You're seeing reports of mutiny. You're seeing reports of refusing to fight. They're quarantining the fresh troops away from the troops they've been fighting, lest they find out about what's about to happen.
They don't need to find that out.
The Wagner Group can now no longer recruit from prison.
It's safer in a Russian gulag than it is on the battlefield.
Because the prisoners have...
Imagine that the war is so bad that you
saying
prefer the gulag.
Because
Putin's gulag's better. Literally.
As they said, if you go and fight, if you run
6
away,
months.
if you desert, you do 6 months and you're home.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're home scot-free.
But you won't make 6 minutes.
Right. The whole thing is, even the ones that have made 6 months, they're re-signed in.
Right.
And also the fact that it is so brutal. As somebody said, it's essentially a life sentence with better food. right. Is to go on the line. And the problem is, every day you go out on that line, you're getting that much closer to catching a bullet. And look, one of the things that I'm absolutely blown away with is the Ukrainians' ability to improvise with the kit they've given. They have
their tactical awareness.
Yeah, they have yes-anded their way through this war brilliantly to the point their drone, as someone said, there's a real problem with ammunition, but they can be producing 20,000 drones a month. And even though the Russians have said we know how to deal with drones, they were dealing with drones in Syria and very simple kind of drones. The stuff that they're facing with the Ukrainians is absolutely brilliant.
Right.
Yes, and also what a lot of people don't realize too, the Ukrainians have been rebuilding. Construction has been going on. They're rebuilding, and they're doing really quick.
Yeah.
I mean, they're putting the rest of us to shame.
No, that's right. I mean, you try to get a pothole filled in Sydney and you're waiting months, but
I'm still trying to get my kitchen renovated. By the way.
I was
if there's any builders out there.
I was in Kyiv when the first, they hadn't been hit since the Battle of Kyiv. So it was October last year, give or take. And there was huge explosions in the middle of the city, right near the university, and school kids' parks, etc.
Right.
It was horrific. But there was a massive crater in the middle of one of their main intersections. They'd covered it up. And cars are driving on it again within 24 hours. And they're making that a point of pride, right? To say you can't break us.
Well, yeah, because it was interesting. A conservative, popular American.
Oh,
of
I know
course.
that, yes.
Yeah, you know the tweet, and like he put
He's
up
like, this war's fake
Yeah, this
because-
war's fake because you know the building that had a massive hole now doesn't have a massive hole,
called
and it's like,
reconstruction,
well, I
champ.
was like, yeah, it's someone who doesn't understand construction, and because
Called tradies, buddy.
because
Right.
high-level Ukrainians have been sharing these images saying we are
Yeah,
rebuilding.
it's a point of pride.
It is a point of pride.
Right.
And I think that hopefully Russia is going to start to back away a little bit more. I give it 6 months as well. I think it's going to end in 6 months. I don't see how it can possibly go on from a political perspective and also from, you know, boots on the ground perspective.
Yeah.
At some point you're going to run out
Well,
of people.
the thing is, he's either going to run out of cash,
or people.
he's going to run out of troops, or he's going to run out of kit and
Yes.
equipment. And if he has to go back to get another call up and things are going that badly, that's a question mark. How does he look? Forgetting about using the cash to evade sanctions, he's been using that to essentially insulate Russians economically from the impacts of the war. Right?
Yeah.
So there'll be no more cash for people at home.
Yeah.
So the
as soon as
prospect,
that happens.
well, indeed, right? So
They're
all these
already
things
doing
are
it tough.
all these things are on a collision course.
Yeah.
And I look at that and going, right, a sensible guy goes, I've got to deal my way out of this.
Yes.
Except he can't deal his way out.
No.
Of it. And so what does he do? And so he sits there and goes, well, we've got to keep going. And then everyone else goes, you know what? How do we reckon that we might go without Putin? And I think the West can very cleverly be signaling in the background going, you know what? Whoever knocks this guy off will be prepared to talk to and deal
Yes.
I
with
have
it.
a
They got a
feeling that
sense of-
someone's going to stand one of those tables of his up on its end and then push him off the other end.
Yeah.
Well, that would be
I
enough. They're
really-
pretty long.
Exactly.
I mean, that'd be a couple of story drop.
I do believe it'll be let's go upstairs and have a chat,
That's right.
lad.
And I would imagine as well there would be, you know, spies from other countries kind of nestled in
Oh, yeah.
around that
Look,
area.
I think you'll find that the interesting thing that came out right at the beginning of the war was the fact that the Americans were saying this is going to happen. It was a real intelligence coup for them.
100%. The front running of the intelligence was
Right,
extraordinary.
the intelligence they ran, but also Biden. It was Biden and it was the UK and the US, right?
Yep.
So both MI6 and the CIA knew what was going on, and the big thing is when everyone went, no, it's not happening. The French were very much like, oh no, we know the Russians, it's not happening.
Yeah.
And it's when the US actually turned around to the French and went, they've moved their medical units.
You're right.
To
The
the
blood
front.
banks are on the...
And the blood banks,
Yeah,
they've
the
moved
blood
their
banks
blood
is the big
reserves
thing.
up there.
Once you've moved the blood reserves, when it was explained to me is that once you've mobilised that degree, it's very difficult to demobilise. And I think, you know, in many ways, World War I, Germany mobilised and they're like, well, I guess we kind of have to keep going now, right?
Yeah.
And like this is part of the trap of it. It's very
Once you
expensive.
move your blood
Totally.
stocks into the
Totally.
into the staging area, it's going
on.
on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the thing is, the Americans knew this, and their best option was to actually go, let's go totally public and tell the world this is
100%.
happening. Now, everyone in the world went, oh, Sleepy Joe, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
And then what happened 36 hours later? The tanks rolled in.
It was actually one of the really interesting things about the war in the way that the Russians were positioned for the first time ever. Putin is very good at shaping the information space and shaping, therefore,
Yes.
Russian grievances, getting enough people to accept it. Pretty much in 2014 when they annexed Crimea, you had a lot of people going, well, Crimea, did it belong to Russia once upon a time? Oh, it's hard to know, you know.
Yep.
And so, the Russians kind of need a warm sea base. Like people were spreading
justifying
the
it.
talking
Yeah,
points,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Whereas on this one, we knew, but in the past we would know, but never tell anyone, right?
Yeah.
It was the rapid declassification of the intelligence.
Yes.
It's the unprecedented thing to use it to shape the environment. So once Putin went in, he was indisputably the bad guy, and there was
Yep.
not going to be any false flag operations. There wasn't going to. So Putin, you invade, you're going in as the bad guy, and in the end, because he's quite happy being the sort of
The bad guy.
the Darth Vader of
he
global
loves it.
geopolitics.
He's
kind
totally the Darth
he's
Vader.
always reveled in that
Yeah.
persona.
Well, they're both bald, so it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
One's got a helmet, but
The other one's got a bear that he rides.
that's right. I don't know if Putin had someone else voicing him because they, of course, it was
Yeah, it
James
was-
Earl Jones.
James Earl
voicing
Jones was doing
but
it.
it wasn't the
David Prowse wanted to do it.
Right.
They said, you can either get in the suit and shut up or
Right.
you can go home. And
Right,
he went,
right, right.
With a suit.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting point, though, is there was... the scuttlebutt around was there was definitely sources in the Kremlin that was
Totally.
feeding that intelligence out.
Totally.
Whether it was one person, whether it's many, it's unsure. Now I believe you would have multiple sources coming out of the
100%.
Kremlin.
100%, because they would be working hard to try and find a way out of this
Yeah.
in the best
Even
way
just
possible.
personally. And like,
or be
yes.
the guy that you remember when I was telling you that stuff.
Yep,
You
yep,
remember?
yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
I mean, it was interesting just as well on the early intelligence. all the hit squads that were after Zelenskyy in the opening exchange of the war the first week or two when the Russians were kind of deeply penetrated Ukraine and they'd send their death squads in for Zelenskyy. The FSB, they believe, were leaking the positions of those death squads to the Ukrainians, which is extraordinary.
Yeah.
So that's Russia's internal, effectively their ASIO. Basically, it gives you an indication of, I think a lot of the people in the intelligence services of Russia thought this was a bad idea.
They don't want it.
And they thought this is going to go badly.
Yep.
And, I think in many ways it's the trap of the dictator that 25 years of great job, boss, in the end leads you into a calamity like this because no one ever challenges what you say, because if you do, you fall out of a window, right?
Yeah, totally.
And
we've seen that.
So you don't get clear intelligence.
Right. But there's enough doubt inside the show that when I put that together, along with what you're saying now, along with the fact that he's in such a bad way and the fact that Russia's running out of runway, I think they're going to say, you know what? It's time for to put Uncle Vlad in the retirement home in the sky, the old KGB unit in the sky.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think
It's hard to see him get arrested. I think it's
No.
more likely that we wake up and he's had a heart attack.
Yep.
But, who knows?
I think
There's not going to be a perp war.
we're closer and closer to the heart attack, and we've reached the end, unfortunately. No heart attack at the end of this app. But
Time for your penthouse, Mr. Putin.
I mean, we could just talk to you for hours.
Have a look at the balcony.
I know.
It's lovely.
I've got 4,000 words of material to go through if you'd like to keep going.
You like to read that article.
I could.
I know.
I could read it at slow speed.
No, I actually do enjoy your writing. It's just whenever I have a good,
This
2
was a
hours spare,
lengthy piece. No. Normally my op-eds of a Friday are 750, 800, so much tighter read.
I do remember starting to scroll and went, oh, crap.
Cry.
coffee.
Yeah, I do that sometimes as well. I go, how long does this go for? Because I'm really interested in it, but geez, I don't know.
I know.
But
I
I know when I'm over it is when I go, because I generally pick it up on Twitter, is when I go, and by the way, if you want to join the conversation,
at I Spied Podcast.
Yeah, you threw me off.
I know, at I Spied Podcast.
On Twitter. Anyway, sorry about that. That's just the plug. If
Got to
I'm
get it in.
scrolling
If you
through
won't
and
plug your own podcast, who will, mate?
Yeah, exactly. No one's plugging us.
No,
That's right.
look at us.
Except plugging him into a machine to stop talking.
Well, how do you do?
No, look, Fin Review, Misha, highly recommend everyone go out and read. Diplomates, also great podcast. Thank you so much for
thank you
joining
very
us.
much.
No,
Jones.
great pleasure. Thanks for having me on so soon after we last spoke.
You can come in every week if you want.
It's important to have. It's important for people to be talking about it.
Absolutely.
And look, we can't give up. Ukraine must win. Our fates. Australia's fate is very much intertwined with what happens there. So,
And
it's
let's
important.
hope we have you in probably within the next 6 months to
When
talk
it's
about
all
the
over,
end.
hopefully. Yeah.
The end.
Yeah,
Pop
I
that
really hope
champagne bottle.
we're not talking about a 2-year.
No.
I hate the term anniversary, but marker of the war.
Yeah.
It'd be a real shame.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Pleasure being here.